I'm going to go now to introducing Adrienne Kinne. I've gotten to know Adrienne over the years, and I've watched her grow within the organization, and she's now our national president and just the right person for the job. She's a great young woman. We're grateful to have her. You know, we've got challenging times in the world and in our organization. So I'm going to introduce now Adrienne, who's been an active member in Veterans of the Movement since 2007, first with Iraq Veterans Against the War and currently with Veterans for Peace. She served stateside in the U.S. Army from 1994 to 2004 as an Arabic linguist, having enlisted during her senior year of high school. She has an educational background in psychology and social work with over 10 years of experience in a variety of positions with the Veterans Administration. Since connecting with the Veteran Peace Movement, she has worked with organizations at the local, state, and national and international level. After living in London for 2 years, she recently returned with her husband, Danny, also a veteran and member of Veterans for Peace, their cat, Duffy, and her dog, Pax, to their home area of Central New York. They are getting connected with local community and activism organizations, while Adrienne maintains her role as president of Veterans for Peace Board of Directors. Okay, Adrienne?
Thank you, Barry, and excellent presentation, Gary, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this awesome event. So I was asked to discuss the convergence of war and militarism in the climate crisis. And as Gary presented, the US military is the largest user of natural resources and producer of pollution on the planet. Members of Veterans for Peace have long advocated for addressing this connection. And this is a connection that has historically been overlooked by climate activists. So some of our work includes, as Gary went into detail, our anti-nuclear work, work against drones and the F-35, addressing the impacts of burn pits, Agent Orange, and depleted uranium on veterans and civilian populations alike. We've worked to address the impacts of burn pits, Agent Orange, depleted uranium, and PFAS on veterans and civilian populations alike, both here in the United States and around the world. And we have made some steps in that effort. As Gary shared, they are now looking at doing more research into PFAS. I think that sometimes research is the code word for stalling, but it's at least a step in the right direction. So I would actually like to discuss another aspect of the impacts of war and militarism on our environment, and this being the impacts on our interpersonal environment, which I believe is also facing a crisis and deserves our attention. So increasingly, people are alienated from one another, in part due to the desire of the systems in which we all live to maintain their dominance by getting us to see one another as the enemy, thereby reducing our power and effectiveness. How we treat one another directly impacts our lives and the environment we all live in. And that has gotten markedly worse over recent years, in part via the toxic, polarizing political messaging and campaigning of our politicians to the whitewashing of information schools are allowed to teach our children, to name just a couple of examples. We must acknowledge that racism and white supremacy, sexism and misogyny, among many other systems of oppression, are alive and well, and that white cis people in particular have all grown and learned in a country where these systems impacted our understanding of the world around us and our privilege, whether or not we're aware of that privilege. We have benefited from the systems that exist because we are part of the dominant power structure, whether or not we have the millions and billions that other white cis people have. You know, they look at us as not as undesirable as others. And that addressing these inequalities is not about reverse racism or cancel culture, but it's imperative that we all create a society that and culture where all are feel welcomed and have their ability to achieve their own needs and desires respected. So Veterans for Peace has been working on improving our internal health as an organization, as well as how we interact with others in our interpersonal and activist spaces. This is definitely a work in progress. In 2018, we adopted a code of conduct that tries to give some guidelines about how we can be good and treat each other respectfully, to include actively listening to one another. We established a transformative justice committee in 2020, and we are currently pursuing a diversity, equity, and inclusion audit of our organization. All of these are a work in progress. They probably will be a work in progress for eternity because we're always constantly learning, and learning, in my belief, it never ends. We're always learning how to be better human beings. And it's just so important for us to be open to learning. You might ask, what does this have to do with the impacts of war and militarism on the climate crisis and why it's relevant? Well, I have long believed that if we do not work to improve our own understanding of how to be better as human beings with one another, then despite all of our efforts to address the climate crisis, war, militarism, social injustice, that we're all facing together, then the same conditions will exist that allowed these crises to get this far to begin with. And that inevitably we would end up in the same situation in the long term, even if we were to succeed in the short term. And I honestly believe that we can succeed. Otherwise, I would not be here and be part of activism. I would be trying to enjoy what could be the last days I have on the planet to the fullest extent possible. But so there are a couple of examples. For instance, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the world was experiencing ever increasing lead pollution. In 1980, the EPA decided to start regulating lead in motor vehicle gasoline. It was banned. And between 1980 and 2014, the levels of lead in the air reduced by 98%. And most of that happened within the first few years after lead was removed from gasoline. The UN Environment Program announced this August that the last country has finally removed lead from their gasoline, that being Algeria, which banned leaded gasoline from their supplies. Other lessons that show promise are the lessons we learned from COVID, that it is possible for our communities and governments to make change fast and convert industries quickly to meet the needs of the time. So if you think about all of the industries that stopped what they were doing and started producing sanitizer or protective equipment or face masks, or you name it, things that were needed, people developed a vaccine in a record amount of time. Now, unfortunately, access is an issue that we're still working on, and that just shows the connection between having something and then actually viewing all human beings of having an equal right to whatever they need in order to be able to have a healthy, peaceful life and access to the resources that enables that life to be lived to its fullest. So a lot of organizations have been taking strides to improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity is, ensuring that people from different backgrounds are welcome in your organization space. That might include different people based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status, language, ability, age, religious commitment, or political perspective. Equity is promoting justice, impartiality, and fairness within your organization to ensure that people have access. And inclusion is making sure that those diverse people actually feel and are welcome to the degree that they are able to participate fully in the decision-making processes and development opportunities within your organization or group. So to be diverse without being equitable and inclusive is to tokenize. And this is something I have felt, and I'm sure I have also committed against other people. Like all of this, I am trying to learn as best as I can. And it's my belief that we can all benefit from learning this and that it will strengthen our movement and our ability to affect change in the world around us. So, what does tokenization look like? So you might recruit diverse people to former leadership positions, but you keep all the power. Your paid staff in charge of messaging are white cis men, and your volunteer activists and storytellers are not. You only hire people from marginalized populations to work on problems experienced by people from marginalized populations. You create and maintain an organizational culture that promotes white dominance. You convene special diversity councils, but don't build BIPOC leadership on your board of directors. You may even know that your nonprofit organization would benefit from being more diverse, but you don't understand why. Or you might invite young people to your organizational space, but do not allow them a seat at the table. So, tokenization, to summarize, is to ask Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Muslim, LGBTQ, women and youth, as well as others, to positions of power and responsibility to make you feel good or your organization look good, but you do not actually give them the respect, authority, or access to material resources to affect change. We are working on this in Veterans for Peace. I am working on this as an individual. And I mean, let's face it, we are all facing so many threats in this moment. There is the climate crisis, social justice uprisings, and we're all rising up to take on these issues. War and militarism thrives by encouraging racism, sexism, homophobia, and the climate crisis impacts people differently depending on who they are. For example, white rich people can escape pollution, whereas the poor cannot. Eventually, however, all of these isms are going to catch up to all of us. There is no escaping it. And we need to see the interconnectedness of these issues so that we do not continue to create systems that are rooted in the white supremacy that got us to this situation to begin with. I have long felt that Veterans for Peace needs to embrace these concepts at a molecular level if we ever hope to achieve our goal of peace and social justice in hopefully my and your lifetime. And all it can do is make the world a better place, which, you know what, maybe I'm wrong, but if we all treat each other more equitably and inclusive, then we can only benefit. Just like if we did all the things we could do in this moment right now to address the climate crisis, like using alternative energy, reducing our carbon footprint, ensuring we have clean water and clean air, regardless of whether or not somebody believes in the climate crisis, as we've said for so long, golly, wouldn't it be nicer to live in a world that looks like that? So I would just implore us all to continue to look at the interconnectedness of all of these issues. And I feel that by acknowledging and working to address these issues can only make us stronger. You know, there are so many good people working on so many good things that we're stronger and we're more vibrant, and we are more effective when we do that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our Gamers for Peace collective. And I think I will be turning it back to Barry to make that transition. So thank you, Barry, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Adrienne. Yeah, you know, you're leading us to a much higher level. You know, I've always said that, you know, I always thought that love is the answer, you know. The answer to all our problems is love.